The grand cathedral was filled with the sounds of soft chatter and laughter as the guests took their seats, admiring the delicate flowers that draped the walls and the soft glow of the chandeliers hanging above. Sophia stood at the back of the room, her heart fluttering with excitement. Today was supposed to be a day of joy, a day of celebration for her sister Megan's wedding. It was supposed to be a moment to bask in the love of family, to witness the start of a beautiful new chapter in Megan's life. She had been looking forward to this day for months, watching as everything came together. Her sister, the one who had always been the center of attention, was finally getting the fairy tale she had always dreamed of. Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with pride as she looked around the room. Everything was perfect: the flowers, the music, the guests who had traveled from all over to be a part of this special day. And as she adjusted her dress, she looked up at the altar, where her sister was standing in her wedding gown. The moment felt like a dream. Megan, radiant as ever, was about to marry the man Sophia had once thought would be hers. Mark, the man she had spent years with, the man who had been by her side through every high and low, the man who had promised her the future, the one she had imagined herself growing old with. Sophia felt a rush of warmth spread through her chest as she thought about the life they were supposed to have together. But that warmth was quickly replaced with a cold, creeping unease that she couldn't quite place. She tried to shake it off, telling herself that everything was fine, that this was her sister's day, and that she was happy for her. But the unease wouldn't leave her. As the ceremony began, she stood at the back of the church, admiring her sister and trying to keep her emotions in check. She had always played the quiet, supportive role in her family, never wanting to steal the spotlight, always stepping aside for Megan's needs. That was just how it was. Megan was always the one everyone turned to, the one everyone cheered for. She had always been the center of attention, and Sophia had always been okay with that. But today, as she watched her sister step toward the altar, something felt off. As the music swelled and the crowd turned their eyes toward the front of the room, Sophia caught sight of Mark standing at the altar, smiling at her sister, his eyes filled with warmth and affection. But then something happened. As her sister took her place beside him, Mark's gaze flickered across the room, and for a split second their eyes met. And in that moment Sophia's heart stopped. The smile that had been on her face disappeared, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. It was as if the world had suddenly gone quiet, the sounds of the ceremony fading into the background. Everything in the room blurred, and all she could focus on was the man she thought she knew so well, the man who had promised to be hers, standing there with a different woman. Sophia's mind raced, 1,000 thoughts swirling in her head, but none of them made sense. She stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away from the scene before her. She felt the weight of the moment crash down on her, suffocating her with a sense of disbelief. Then it hit her. He wasn't just standing there as her sister's fiancé. He was her husband-to-be. Mark was marrying Megan, her sister, the woman she had loved, trusted, and supported for years. The woman she had always believed would never hurt her. The woman who had stolen everything. Sophia felt the color drain from her face as the full impact of the betrayal hit her like a ton of bricks. Her heart felt like it had been ripped from her chest, leaving her breathless, suffocating. She had spent years loving Mark, believing that he was the one she would spend the rest of her life with. And now he was marrying her sister. Her entire world seemed to shatter in that moment. She was surrounded by friends and family watching the ceremony, yet she felt more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. She tried to breathe, to hold herself together, but the reality was too much. She stumbled back, retreating to the back of the room, trying to steady her shaking legs. But the more she tried to collect herself, the more the tears welled up in her eyes, burning like acid. She had been used. She had been discarded. Her mind raced as memories flooded back. Memories of their time together, the promises they had made, the life they had planned. How long had it been going on? How could he do this to her? How could he betray her so completely, so coldly, in front of everyone she knew? The questions kept coming, each one more painful than the last. Her heart ached as she replayed every moment, every word, every gesture that now seemed so fake, so full of lies. She had been blind to it all. He had been deceiving her, using her love as a stepping stone to something better, something more lucrative, more glamorous. And the worst part? Her sister had known. Megan had known, and she had stolen him anyway. Sophia felt her world crumble into pieces as she stood there, watching the man she loved marry the woman she had trusted most. She felt humiliated, worthless, like she had been nothing but a placeholder for Megan's fairy tale. She turned away from the ceremony, unable to watch any longer. The sound of the vows, the clinking of glasses, the soft laughter in the air all felt like a distant echo. She didn't belong there anymore. She didn't belong in the life she had thought was hers. She ran out of the church, not caring who saw her, not caring what anyone thought. She just needed to escape. She needed to be alone. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she fled into the night. The cool air hit her skin like a slap in the face, but it did nothing to numb the pain that seared through her chest. She was alone. She was betrayed. And the worst part? She had given everything, her love, her trust, her soul, and in return she had been tossed aside like she was nothing. Alone in the quiet, empty street, she sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. She had spent her whole life believing she had been enough. But she wasn't. Not for him. Not for her sister. Not for anyone. And as the weight of the betrayal sank in, she made a silent promise to herself. She would not let this destroy her. She would take her life back. This would not be the end of her story. It would be the beginning of something far greater. Sophia's eyes slowly fluttered open, the familiar scent of the hospital room hitting her nostrils. The sterile smell, the quiet beeping of machines, the cool air. Everything felt strange. She blinked several times, trying to adjust to the dim light of the room, confused, disoriented. Her mind raced, unsure of where she was or how she had gotten there. The pain in her chest was sharp, almost suffocating, as if someone had ripped the very essence of her away. But as she focused on the world around her, something was off. This room wasn't right. It wasn't where she had been. The bed was different, the walls unfamiliar, and the sounds. Everything was out of place. Then it hit her. The wedding. Her sister's wedding. The day that had shattered her. The day when she had lost everything. Her fiancé, her sister, her trust, and the life she had built around them. The betrayal. The broken promises. The abandonment. She remembered it all. She had been left behind. And yet the emptiness she had felt earlier, the hurt and pain, was replaced by something new. An unfamiliar sense of calm. She looked down at herself, expecting to feel the scars, the ache from the wounds of betrayal. But there were no scars, no deep cuts. There was no brokenness. It was as if she had been reset. Confusion settled over her as she slowly sat up. Her hands shook as she touched her legs, and she immediately checked for any signs of injury or the missing pieces of herself. But they were there, her legs were whole, her body intact. There was no accident. No wreckage. Nothing had been lost. Sophia blinked again, trying to grasp what was happening. She felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Like she had been in this moment before, trapped in a moment of perfect clarity. And then it struck her. This wasn't just a feeling of déjà vu. It was more than that. She had gone back in time. Her heart skipped a beat. This was no dream, no hallucination. She had been given a second chance. The thought made her head spin. This was impossible. She should have been broken emotionally and physically. She should have been carrying the weight of her sister's betrayal, the weight of the man she had loved choosing her sister over her, and the devastating knowledge that she had given everything and received nothing in return. But now she was here, back before it all happened. Sophia closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her mind was racing. She wasn't sure how or why she was here, but she knew one thing with complete certainty. She was not going to repeat the same mistakes. She wasn't going to follow the path she had before. She wasn't going to let the past dictate her future. This time she would control her destiny. Sophia rose from the bed, her legs firm beneath her as she walked toward the window. The light outside felt too bright, too crisp. But it was a reminder that today was new. Today the world was hers to shape. The realization hit her slowly. She had been given a second chance, and this time, she wasn't going to waste it. The first thing she did was turn off her phone. No more calls from her family. No more texts from Megan pretending to be concerned. No more distractions. She was going to do things her way, the way she should have from the start. Sophia had always been the obedient daughter, the supportive sister. She had spent her life walking behind others, especially Megan. Megan had always been the center of attention, always the one getting praise, always the one with everything handed to her. And for too long Sophia had accepted that. She had allowed herself to be sidelined, pushed aside to make space for someone else's happiness. Not anymore. She walked to the small desk by the window and pulled out a notebook she had found in her hospital bag. Felt strangely familiar. The first page was blank, and as she grabbed a pen, she began to write. Today I start over. Today I take control. The words felt like a vow. She could feel the weight of everything she had endured. But instead of letting it crush her, she was going to turn it into something new. She thought of Mark, how he had betrayed her, how he had chosen Megan over her. He was gone from her life now. He didn't exist in this new reality, this new second chance. She wouldn't waste another moment on him trying to prove her worth. He had made his choice and now she would make hers. Sophia focused on her career. She had always had a passion for interior design, a dream she had pushed aside for too long, thinking she had to fit into the mold others had created for her. No more. She would follow her passion, and this time, she wouldn't let anyone's expectations shape her future. She didn't need to be the woman who supported others. She could be the one who stood on her own 2 feet, who built something from the ground up. Her confidence grew as she made the decisions that had always seemed impossible before. She started building connections, reaching out to mentors, and getting involved in the community. She learned everything she could about starting a business. And each step, no matter how small, brought her closer to the future she had always wanted for herself. She was no longer the sidelined daughter, the overlooked woman. She was Olivia, a force of her own capable of anything. And soon she started to see results. Her first project came through, a small job but a job nonetheless. She decorated a local cafe, transforming the space into something elegant, comfortable, and inviting. It wasn't much, but it was her work, something she could be proud of. The feedback was incredible. People praised her for the design, for the way she had captured the essence of the cafe's spirit. The owners were thrilled, and they recommended her to others. That one small job led to more, and slowly but surely, her business began to grow. But it wasn't just her career that began to flourish. For the first time in her life, Sophia realized that she didn't need anyone's validation to feel worthy. She didn't need the approval of her family, her sister, or even Mark. She was capable of succeeding without them. And that realization that she was enough on her own was what fueled her transformation. As the months passed, she focused on herself, her goals, and her new life. She started working out, taking care of her body, and nurturing her mind. She read books, took online courses, and surrounded herself with people who supported her. People who truly saw her. The girl who had once been abandoned was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was standing tall, proud of who she had become. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't invincible. But she was stronger than she had ever been. And as each day passed, she became more certain that this was the life she had always been meant to live. She looked back on her old life, on her family's rejection, on Megan's betrayal. And instead of feeling anger or sorrow, she felt gratitude. Because they had shown her what she was capable of without them. Sophia was free. And this time she would never go back. Sophia had spent so many years living for others, caring for their happiness, adjusting to their expectations, putting herself last in a life she never truly got to choose. The echoes of her past life, the disappointments and betrayals, faded with each step she took toward the life she now knew she deserved. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders. She had been living in the shadows of others for far too long, and now she was walking into the light, no longer a background character in her own story. The first step, she realized, was to find her own place in the world. She needed to build something from the ground up, a life that was entirely hers. The foundation was shaky at first, her savings were small, her skills limited, and the fear of failure constantly clawed at her. But she pushed it aside, determined to carve out a future that didn't rely on anyone else's validation. She enrolled in a series of courses, online programs that would allow her to expand her skill set, to build a new life. She wasn't sure exactly where this path would lead, but she knew she had to start somewhere. For the first time, the thought of her own future became the most important thing in her life. Her goals, her dreams, these were hers alone. But the struggle wasn't easy. Financial difficulties hit her hard in the beginning. With no job to rely on and only a small amount of savings left from her time working odd jobs, she had to stretch every penny. There were nights when she went to bed hungry, unable to afford the luxuries that she had once taken for granted. The pressure to make it all work weighed heavily on her. And then there was loneliness. The silence of her apartment at night, the absence of any family support, was a constant reminder that she had chosen this new path alone. There were times when she doubted her choices, times when she wondered if she had been foolish to think she could succeed on her own. But those moments were fleeting because deep down, she knew she couldn't go back. The rejection from her family, the betrayal from Megan and Mark, that had once felt like it would break her forever, was now the very fuel that kept her going. She would prove to herself, and to them, that she was capable of more than they had ever believed. Her first real breakthrough came when she landed a small freelance project. It wasn't much, but it was something. She was finally doing something on her own, working for herself. She took the project seriously, pouring her heart into every detail, hoping to impress the client, hoping that it could be the start of something bigger. The day she got the email confirming the job was hers, her hands trembled as she read the words. She had done it. She had created something from scratch with no one's help, no one's approval. It was a small victory, but it meant everything to her. With that success, everything changed. She was no longer a passive observer of her own life. She was an active participant, making decisions, setting goals, and achieving them. Every project she took on, every challenge she faced, made her stronger. She began networking, meeting people who respected her skills and saw her potential. Slowly, word spread about her talent, and the jobs started to come in. Her small freelance business grew into a full-time career. Sophia no longer felt the pull of doubt that used to haunt her. Every time she landed a new client, every time her name was mentioned in positive light, she could feel the confidence returning to her. The self-doubt, the lingering questions about her worth, slowly slipped away as she proved to herself that she could do this. Her independence grew stronger with every step. And as she gained more confidence, something unexpected happened. She met someone. His name was Andrew, a fellow entrepreneur she had met at a business networking event. He was kind, grounded, and incredibly supportive of her work. He saw her as more than just the businesswoman. He saw her as the person she had become. Their connection wasn't like anything she had experienced before. Andrew didn't need her to be anyone else. He didn't want to fix her or make her better. He appreciated her for exactly who she was, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to change. Andrew respected her independence, celebrated her achievements, and encouraged her to continue pushing forward. He didn't come into her life with expectations or demands. He didn't need her to complete him. He simply wanted to share the life they were both building. But the most important thing about Andrew was that he didn't remind her of the past. He wasn't a reflection of the person who had abandoned her. He was a reflection of the woman she had become. And that, more than anything, made all the difference. Their relationship wasn't built on need or dependency. It was built on mutual respect, mutual admiration, and an equal desire to support each other in their personal growth. As their relationship grew stronger, so did her confidence. Soon, her business started to expand even further. She was no longer just freelancing. She was building a brand. She started mentoring others, helping people who were in situations similar to hers, showing them how to take control of their lives and find success on their own terms. She had become a voice of empowerment for others who had been knocked down by life, just like she had been. Her first major success came when a large company reached out to her for a collaboration. The deal was huge, and it would catapult her business to a level she hadn't thought possible. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to prove to everyone, including herself, that she was more than capable of achieving everything she had dreamed of. The deal went through, and just like that, she had made it. The woman who had once been abandoned by her family, humiliated by the people she trusted, was now a force to be reckoned with. She had transformed her pain into strength and used it to build a life that was hers alone. A life she had created, nurtured, and grown with her own hands. Sophia had spent so many years believing that her happiness was tied to others. She had spent so long thinking that she needed someone else's love or approval to be worth anything. But now she had discovered something much more powerful. She had always been enough. As the months went by, she grew stronger, wiser, and more determined. She realized that the woman who had been cast aside, the one who had been forgotten, no longer existed. She was someone new, someone unrecognizable to those who had once known her. And as she looked ahead at the life she had built, at the future she was creating, she knew that this was only the beginning. The journey had been long, the pain had been unbearable, but it had all led her to this moment. The woman who had once been broken was now unstoppable. The past no longer had a hold on her. She was free, and she would never allow anyone to take that from her again. Megan's life had seemed perfect. On the surface, everything had come together just as she had always dreamed. Her wedding had been the event of the year, the one everyone had talked about for months. The guests had showered her with praise, calling her the lucky bride, the one who had found true love. She had Mark by her side, the man she had fought for, the man she had taken from her sister. She believed that their love story was meant to be, that her life was finally falling into place. But it didn't take long for the cracks to begin to show. At first, they were small things, flashes of irritation when Mark didn't call her after a late meeting, the offhand comments about her being too busy to spend time with him. She brushed them off, convincing herself that everything would work itself out. After all, they were in love, weren't they? But the cracks soon deepened. Mark's charming demeanor started to fade. The man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once been so attentive and sweet, began showing sides of himself that she hadn't noticed before. He became more manipulative, controlling, and selfish, and it was starting to wear on her. Every conversation seemed to revolve around what he needed, what he wanted, and what would make his life easier. There was no room for her, no consideration for her own needs. The man who had promised to cherish her was now treating her like an afterthought. It wasn't just the little things that started to pile up. Mark began to show his true nature in more serious ways. He had always been successful, the ambitious go-getter kind of guy who was on the rise in his career. But now he seemed to be getting into trouble at work. His company had been making poor decisions, and the pressure of it all was starting to show. Megan noticed the way his moods had shifted. He would come home late, his face drawn and tired, and he would avoid talking about his day, telling her that it was all just business stuff. The financial troubles started to show. Bills were piling up, and Mark started becoming emotionally unavailable. He would isolate himself in their home office, staring at his computer screen for hours. Megan had tried to talk to him about it, but he would brush her off, claiming that everything would get better soon. The woman who had once been so confident, the one who had fought for this perfect life, now found herself feeling isolated and unsure. Mark's indifference to her concerns and his inability to communicate had put a strain on their marriage. She had always told herself that everything would be okay, that love would be enough to make everything right. But now she wasn't so sure. And then the unexpected happened. Mark lost his job. The company he had worked for had gone under, and he was left without a paycheck, a future, or any stability. It wasn't just a job, it was a blow to his pride. He had always seen himself as someone who had everything under control, the person who was always going to rise to the top. But now he was at the bottom, and it shook him to his core. He became more distant, more resentful. The man Megan had fought so hard for wasn't the man she was living with anymore. He wasn't the one who had made her feel like she was the center of his world. He was becoming someone else, someone she didn't recognize. Megan found herself questioning everything. She thought back to the moments before the wedding, the way she had stolen him away from Sophia, the promises he had made. She had been so sure of herself, so sure that this was the life she was meant to have. But now the perfect life she had worked so hard for seemed to be crumbling before her eyes. She tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that things would get better, but they didn't. She saw the way Mark was avoiding her, the way he was withdrawing more and more, and she couldn't help but wonder if the life they had built was nothing but a facade. As Mark spiraled further, Megan started questioning her own decisions. Was this really what she wanted? Was this the man she had fought so hard to claim? Was this the life she had imagined for herself? She didn't know anymore. She was confused, unsure of where she stood, and the guilt of what she had done to her sister, What she had taken from her started to gnaw at her. She could feel the regret creeping in. Had she made the right choice? She wasn't sure. But her pride wouldn't let her admit it. It wouldn't let her admit that she had chosen the wrong man, that she had betrayed her sister for something that wasn't worth it. Meanwhile, Olivia was thriving. It was a silent thing at first, just small successes that she could never have imagined in the past. She had built a life from nothing, focused on herself, her career, and her dreams. She had taken the painful lessons of the past and turned them into her driving force. She was stronger, more successful, and more confident than ever before. And the best part? She no longer needed anyone's approval. Her business was growing. She was no longer the forgotten daughter or the abandoned fiancée. She was the woman who had risen above it all. And as Megan's world continued to unravel, she couldn't help but see the woman she had once discarded flourishing in ways that were unimaginable to her. It wasn't just her business success that made Megan realize how wrong she had been. It was the woman Olivia had become. A woman who didn't need to be chased. A woman who didn't need to settle for a life of misery, just to make someone else happy. Olivia had found her strength and had created a life on her own terms. She was powerful, independent, and despite everything, forgiving. As Megan continued to struggle with the fallout from her own choices, she found herself watching from the sidelines. It was Olivia who had become everything she had once dreamed of, and it was in that moment that Megan realized the truth. The regret settled heavily in her chest, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She had spent so much time competing with her sister, so much time trying to claim something that was never truly hers, that she had failed to realize what she had lost. Olivia was thriving and Megan was falling apart. Karma had struck, and it wasn't just the man she had married who had let her down. It was herself. As the days passed and the weight of her choices sank in, Megan had no choice but to watch. To watch Olivia become everything she had never been, to watch her succeed in ways she could never have imagined. And the most painful realization of all was this: Olivia had everything she had ever wanted, and she had earned it. As Olivia's success continued to rise, Megan knew she could never have what Olivia had. She had made her choices and now it was too late. Karma had come for her, and there was no turning back. Sophia stood at the edge of the hallway, staring at the house she had once called home. It seemed almost unreal, the way the past few years had unfolded. She had walked away from it all, left behind the people who had abandoned her, the family who had never believed in her. Now she stood on the threshold of the very place that had rejected her, the place where her heart had once been shattered into 1,000 pieces. But this time, she wasn't the broken girl who had left all those years ago. She wasn't the daughter who had quietly faded into the background, the one who had been forgotten. No, she was something else now. She was stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever before. She had fought through the storm, had built herself up from nothing, and now she was ready to confront the people who had cast her aside. Sophia took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't doing this for revenge. No, this wasn't about anger or hatred. It was about truth, about making them understand what they had done. They had treated her like she didn't matter, like she was invisible. And it had taken her years to realize that she didn't need them. She had created her own life, a life filled with success, happiness, and freedom. But they had never acknowledged that. They had never seen her for who she was, and now she was going to make them see. She pushed open the door, the familiar scent of her childhood home hitting her senses. She hadn't been here in years. The house looked the same, with the same furniture, the same photos on the walls. But it felt different now, almost suffocating. She felt out of place in this house that used to be hers. She walked into the living room, and the moment they saw her, they froze. Her parents were sitting on the couch, chatting idly, and Megan, her sister, was laughing beside them. They all turned to face her, and the shock in their eyes was immediate. Megan's jaw dropped, her eyes widening in disbelief, while her parents' faces turned pale. They had not expected her to come back. They had not expected to see her again, not like this. Sophia stood there for a moment, taking in the looks on their faces. There was no warmth in their eyes, no welcoming smile. There was only shock, and it made something cold curl in her stomach. She was standing before them, not as the girl they had abandoned, but as a woman they could no longer recognize. She took a step forward, watching their reactions closely. They tried to hide the discomfort, But it was obvious. They were uncomfortable. Not because they were happy to see her, but because they were forced to confront the truth of their actions. Sophia felt the power shift inside her. She had not come here to beg for their approval. She didn't need it. She had never needed it. She was stronger than they had ever given her credit for, and now they would see her strength. "Mom, Dad," Sophia said, her voice steady, cutting through the silence. "Megan." Megan's face flushed, but she quickly masked it with a fake smile. "Sophia, we didn't expect you." She trailed off, her words faltering. Sophia smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "No, I'm sure you didn't." Her parents shifted uncomfortably on the couch, but Sophia didn't give them a chance to speak. She wasn't going to let them control this moment. Not this time. "You all chose her over me," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "You sent me away, told me I didn't matter, that I wasn't worthy of the same attention and love you gave her. You didn't even give me a second thought when you decided to prioritize her wedding over my well-being." Her mother opened her mouth to speak, but Sophia raised her hand, silencing her. "No. You don't get to speak now," she said, her voice cold. "You all saw me as a burden. You thought I would never amount to anything. But look at me now. You were wrong." The silence was deafening. She could feel their guilt, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. They had taken everything from her, and they had never once apologized, never once acknowledged the hurt they had caused. Megan shifted uncomfortably next to their parents, her usual confidence shaken. "Sophia, please," she said, her voice tight, but Sophia could hear the unease beneath her words. "I didn't." "You didn't need to," Sophia interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "You didn't need to take him from me. You didn't need to tear apart everything I had just to build your perfect life. And you didn't need to pretend that I was the problem. I was never the problem, Megan. You were." Megan's face flushed deep red. The words hit her harder than Sophia had intended, but she didn't care anymore. It was time to make them understand the consequences of their choices. Sophia took a step closer to them, her posture tall and proud. "I'm not the girl you abandoned anymore. I'm not the girl who let you control her. I've created a life you could never understand, and I'm happy. You all could never take that from me, no matter how hard you tried. I've built my own happiness, and I don't need your approval." Her parents exchanged glances, their faces filled with a mixture of guilt and disbelief. They hadn't expected her to come back like this. They hadn't expected her to be this strong, this confident. They had expected her to crawl back to them, to beg for their love and validation. But instead she was standing before them, more powerful than they had ever imagined. Sophia looked at them one last time, a sense of finality settling over her. "You all chose her over me. You chose to leave me behind when I needed you the most. Now I'm standing on top, and you're the ones left watching." She didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. She had spoken the truth, and that truth was something they would have to live with for the rest of their lives. She turned on her heel, leaving them with nothing. As she walked out of the room, her heart didn't feel heavy. It felt light. She wasn't burdened by the need for their love anymore. She had forgiven them long ago, but she would never let them back into her life. Not after everything they had done. Sophia walked out of the door, never looking back. She had freed herself from the family who had never truly seen her. She had taken back her life, and now no one could ever take it from her again. Her family was left to deal with the fallout of their choices, but that was their burden to carry now. Sophia had walked away, and nothing could ever bring her back. The grand doors of the church opened and Sophia stepped inside, her heart beating steadily as she made her way down the aisle. The soft hum of the guests, the sound of fabric rustling as they turned their heads to look at her, all seemed distant to her. She was no longer just a daughter, no longer the one who had been discarded. This was her moment, her time to shine, not because of anyone else's approval but because she had earned it. Her wedding was everything she had ever dreamed of, and more. The dress, the flowers, the elegance of the venue. It was a reflection of the life she had built with her own hands. The way the light bounced off the chandeliers above, the way the soft petals of the flowers seemed to glow, it all symbolized the journey she had taken, the challenges she had overcome, and the person she had become. She wasn't the girl who had been abandoned, the girl who had been replaced. She was Sophia. the woman who had chosen herself and had risen to heights they could never have imagined. Her family was there, of course, sitting at the back. They hadn't been invited to the wedding, but somehow they had found a way in. Her parents, her sister Megan, and even Mark were watching from the sidelines, their eyes on her as she walked down the aisle. They had once seen her as nothing more than a shadow, someone who could be cast aside easily. They had replaced her with her sister, thinking she would never amount to anything without them. But today she was everything they had never believed she could be. Sophia couldn't help but glance at them as she walked, feeling the weight of their stares. Megan was sitting stiffly in her chair, her eyes trained on Sophia, her face a mask of resentment and regret. Her mother and father were no better. They didn't know how to look at her. They had expected her to return to them, to beg for their forgiveness. But she hadn't. She had left them behind. She had chosen herself. And now she was standing tall in front of them, more successful, more powerful, more independent than they could ever have imagined. Her smile didn't falter as she walked, and she could see the realization dawn on their faces. This wasn't a wedding like Megan's. This wasn't some grand affair where everything was about appeasing the family's image. This was Sophia's moment, her victory, her happiness. The aisle seemed to stretch longer than she remembered, and she could feel their eyes burning into her back. But she didn't flinch. She had nothing to prove to them. Not anymore. She reached the altar where her fiancé Liam stood waiting. His eyes were full of admiration, full of love. He didn't see her for her past, for the family that had abandoned her, for the history of pain that had followed her for so long. He saw her for the woman she had become. Strong, independent, powerful. Liam had always treated her as an equal, never asking her to dim her light or sacrifice her dreams for him. They had built their relationship on mutual respect and admiration, not on the need for validation from anyone else. Their love wasn't born from survival but from choice, from the freedom to love each other for who they truly were. As the ceremony went on, Sophia felt the weight of the years lifting off her shoulders. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a statement. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing them how much better she was, how much more she had accomplished. It was about proving that she was worthy of everything she had created. Sophia knew that her family, especially Megan, had never expected her to thrive. They had never believed in her, not in the way they believed in her sister. They thought they could take everything from her, the love, the attention, the life she deserved. But today, as she stood here with Liam, in a wedding more luxurious than anything they had ever planned for Megan, she knew they were finally seeing her for who she truly was. The ultimate twist came when the wedding ended, and the guests were escorted to the grand hall for the reception. Megan, sitting at the back of the room, saw the opulence, the grandeur of it all, and for the first time she understood the truth. Sophia had succeeded without them. She had built a life of success, a life of freedom, and it wasn't something Megan could take back. Mark was there too, standing awkwardly in the corner, his face full of regret as he watched Sophia dance with Liam, her face glowing with happiness. He was watching the woman he had discarded grow into the woman he could never have. Sophia's family watched as she celebrated with Liam, surrounded by people who admired her, not because of her past, but because of the person she had become. They were too late. They had missed their chance to be part of her life. They had made their choices, and now they were left with nothing. Her success, her wealth, her happiness, it was hers alone. And that was their true punishment. She smiled at the thought. She had no desire to hurt them. She wasn't here for revenge. She had simply moved on. She had taken her power back, and in doing so, she had shown them that they were nothing without her. The night ended and Sophia stood with Liam, watching the people around them celebrate, seeing the life she had worked so hard to create. And as the music played softly in the background, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had done it. She had built a life where she no longer needed anyone's approval. She had created something beautiful and lasting. She had risen above the family that had discarded her, the sister who had betrayed her, and the man who had walked away. As they left the hall hand in hand, Sophia turned to Liam and smiled. She didn't need to say a word. Her life, her success, her happiness were more than enough. The final words echoed in her mind. I once thought I needed their love. Turns out, all I ever needed was to love myself. Sophia stood in the quiet of the night, Her fingers intertwined with Liam's as they looked out over the city skyline from their new home. The lights of the city below shimmered like stars, a reflection of the life they had built together. Everything she had always dreamed of and more. Her heart felt full, not because of the wealth or the success they had attained, but because of the peace she had found in herself. As they stood together watching the world below, Sophia's mind wandered back to everything she had endured. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness. She thought of Mark, of Megan, of the family who had once been her whole world. The family who had turned their back on her when she needed them the most. And she thought of how, despite everything, she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. Her reflection in the glass before her was different now. She didn't recognize the woman who had once begged for her family's approval, who had given everything to make them proud. The girl who had cried herself to sleep, wondering why she wasn't enough, why she had been left behind, was no longer there. In her place stood someone stronger. Someone unafraid to stand alone and build her life without the weight of others' expectations holding her back. With Liam by her side, she had found a love that wasn't based on need or dependency. He had never expected her to change. He had loved her for exactly who she was, the woman who had risen from the ashes of betrayal and had forged her own destiny. And as she reflected on everything, Sophia knew with certainty that the moment she had walked away from Mark, from Megan, from the family who had never truly seen her, had been the moment she had found herself. It was hard to believe in some ways how far she had come. There had been times, in the depths of her pain, when she had thought she wouldn't survive it, when the weight of rejection had felt like it would crush her. But she had never given up. She had built a life where she was no longer dependent on anyone for her happiness. She had chosen herself every day, even when it was hard, even when the world seemed to be against her. And now, as she looked out at the world she had created, the only thing that remained was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had made the right choice. She had walked away from the things that held her back, from the people who never truly appreciated her. And in doing so, she had found a life that was all her own. A life that was filled with love, success, and peace. Her family was nothing but a distant memory now. The voices of her parents, the guilt they had tried to make her feel, the resentment she had once held for Megan, none of it mattered anymore. They had made their choices, and those choices had led them to where they were now. She couldn't change the past, but she could choose not to live in it anymore. As she stood beside Liam, the man who had never wavered in his support of her, the man who had loved her in the way she had always deserved to be loved, she realized just how far she had come. She had walked away from a life that was suffocating her. And now she was breathing freely. She had built a future that was all her own. One that didn't rely on anyone else to make it complete. The house was everything she had wanted, bright, warm, filled with light and laughter. It was a place where she felt at peace, where she didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. It was a place where she was free to be herself, to follow her dreams, and to live her life without the chains of the past holding her back. Liam turned to her, his hand gently squeezing hers, and in that moment, she knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. They didn't need a grand ceremony or a flashy celebration to prove their love. They had something real, something stronger than anything she had ever imagined. And it was theirs, built together from the ground up. Sophia smiled, a quiet, contented smile, and she kissed Liam's hand. "We did it," she said softly, almost to herself. "I did it." He nodded, his gaze soft but filled with love. "You did," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You've built a life that is nothing short of amazing. And you didn't need anyone to do it." Her heart swelled at his words, the recognition of how far she had come. She had spent so many years waiting for approval, seeking validation from people who never saw her worth. But now she was enough. Sophia leaned into Liam, resting her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time she felt truly at peace. There was no guilt weighing her down, no unfinished business. She had taken the pain of her past and used it to create something beautiful, something lasting. She had not only survived but had come out stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever known. She thought about her family one last time, her parents Megan and Mark, and the truth was simple. She didn't need their love. She had created her own. She had built her own future, made her own choices, and learned how to live without waiting for permission. She had given herself the love she had always sought from others, and that had made all the difference. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the peace of the night wash over her. She had everything she had ever needed, everything she had always wanted. She had found herself, and now she was finally free. The world was waiting for her, and she was ready to meet it on her own terms. Because the woman she was today was more than enough. As she stood there side by side with Liam, looking at the life they had built, she couldn't help but feel grateful for everything. The good and the bad. The pain had led her here to this moment, and now it was nothing but a distant memory. For the first time in her life, Sophia understood what it meant to truly live. To love herself. To be complete. And that was all she ever needed.